Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Predictive Analytics Podcast. Reese T. Fertiller with the esteemed Chris Allen. Chris, how's it going?
Esteemed? I don't know. That's too much for me. How about I'll just take the you're just here with Chris Allen and we can go from there.
How about the average Chris Allen? Is that what you're shooting for?
That's what, the median Chris Allen. I think that's good enough for me at this point. But I'm doing well. Happy holidays to both the T Fertiller family and everybody else that's getting a chance to listen. I appreciate you guys getting me back on. I feel like it was only maybe a couple months ago that we talked, but with as crazy as this season's been and just 2020 in general, it feels like it was a lifetime ago the last time we talked. So I'm happy to get a chance to sit down and talk with you guys again.
Thank you. And are we all going to be sitting there on Thursday night like somebody that escaped 2020 and freedom's here, 2021, come on?
Pretty much. I think it was maybe middle of week 15 or so, maybe end of week 14 when I started to see the light at the end of the tunnel, like in terms of content creation and just the general, the regular season and how much chaos can be, how chaotic it can be. And so now here, this is my last week of regular season content. I'm just excited to be able to sit down and actually enjoy football and just watch and not have to try and process everything all at the same time. So yeah, it definitely feels like a weight is off my shoulders at this point.
Reese will appreciate this. So we're recording this on Tuesday. It's Matthew Berry's birthday. Mm-hmm. And I tweeted him that may this next year be more like the week 16 Alvin Kamara and not the week 15 Alvin Kamara. And
awesome.
Mm-hmm. You just hope it's that kind.
Yeah.
So let's get this party started.
So how did your fantasy leagues go?
Some good, some bad. So for my personal leagues, I made it to the playoffs in roughly half of them, and that's strewn across both dynasty. I'm in about 5 or 6 dynasty leagues, and then 3 or 4 redraft leagues, whether it be with folks from work, invitationals I was brought into, or just and then a couple other just industry leagues, or from folks that also work within the industry I'm a part of. So made it to the playoffs, limped in on a couple of them, mostly carried literally by Derrick Henry and Aaron Jones in a couple of them. Only won a couple of championships this year. So I'm just at least happy that I was able to at least figure out a process for making it through the week to week, whether it be because of injuries. A couple of guys that I've had were placed on the COVID list throughout the season. So I was just happy to be able to have a good showing in a decent amount of my leagues and not just completely have my rosters bottom out. But in a couple of cases, they wind up being that way. But for the most part, I think it was a pretty decent season, all things considered.
So Reese, who was it that's a recent guest that was in a million leagues? Not a million. Was it Ryan?
Ryan has
Ryan McDowell, 25.
That's right.
And I was just thinking, I couldn't imagine doing waivers and lineup setting for all those.
Right. And between my own leagues and I also work for Draft Day Consultants run by Denny Carter. So I was managing 4 additional rosters on top of my own. So Tuesday nights for at least the last 3 months have just been an absolute slog because it's writing content. And then after I'm done with all of my articles for the evening and also prepping for my Wednesday stuff, then it's actually pulling up each of my rosters and setting waiver claims, not just for myself and then also for my clients. So it was a blur trying to get through Tuesday nights.
Yeah, people don't realize it. Reese, you have this to look forward to. When you get paid to do it, it mm-hmm. becomes less fun. And, you think, man, look at that look on his face, Chris. You think, oh, man, it would be awesome. And then you think, then you're doing this for people. I get asked a lot. Chris, you get asked a lot. You talk about clients. You got that I sure hope I give them good advice thought to you, because you don't want anybody to be unhappy.
Yeah. And that comes with the territory. And I understand that's really why people come and ask me about that. I'll get text message from family members and even folks that I work with that aren't in leagues with me, but they just know I'm a part of the industry. And it's they might just be snap calls. Like for me, like, yeah, start Jared Goff. No, sit Russell Wilson, or, play this dude or play that dude. And it's like, even after I just like quickly text them back or whatever, I'm just like, was that the right decision? Like, I almost want to sit down and either go through like other people's rankings or just look up like a number of few stats just to justify my call. But it's like a lot of that stuff, it really does. Like when you get that analyst title like put on you, you almost want to make sure and like fact check yourself and just have like 3 to 4 like bullets of stats or something like that that can back up your claims or whatever. But yeah, it can get kind of, I don't know, grueling, I guess, as the season goes on.
So this is off script. Did you have any bad beats in the playoffs?
I did. I got Kamara'd in one of my leagues, and that completely dusted my team. I don't even want to talk about it. I'm not upset or bitter at all. But in another league, I had a team that featured both Aaron Rodgers and Derrick Henry, and then during Week 15, when both of them essentially laid an egg or just like performed underneath their expectations for the week, that was when like my team just completely went off the rails. And I mean, this was a team that, I mean, if it featured, actually, I had Aaron Rodgers, Derrick Henry, Travis Kelce all on the same team, and then yeah, they just all bottomed out in that 1 week, and I couldn't make it to the finals.
It happens. It happens. It happens.
So what have you learned this season that will improve your thought process for next season?
I would say that the one thing that I've definitely learned this season is that off-season narratives, like, while they're good for maybe the first couple of weeks of the season, and I almost mean that literally. I mean, the first 2 weeks of the season, when we're still trying to figure out how teams are going to operate, whether it be because of new quarterbacks, like the addition of rookies, and so on and so forth, even like new coaching staffs and whatnot. But either way, I mean, those first couple of weeks, I mean, you really need to have your head on a swivel in order to adjust to some of these trends that really start to take place in those first few weeks, and then how you can adjust moving forward. A couple of things, like when earlier in the season, guys like, let's say, Philip Rivers coming over from a new team, I mean, joining Frank Reich in his system, what was that offense going to look like? I mean, we all thought going into the season that, okay, well, he's not going to be the same type of gunslinger that he was like when he was back in LA. They had just tacked on like another offensive lineman. They draft Jonathan Taylor when they already had Marlon Mack. This was going to be a run first team. And for the first couple of weeks, it looked that way. I mean, they were, I think, either like league average or slightly below league average in neutral passing rate. I mean, it was just going to be more of a balanced offense. But as we've seen over the last 6 weeks or so, I mean, they started to trend. I mean, they're just slightly above league average in terms of neutral passing rate. But I mean, Philip Rivers is still a viable streaming quarterback. And we saw that for, I think, like from weeks 10 or 11, basically up until now. I mean, he's at least had like a QB 15, QB 16, around 17, 18 points per week, like type of average. I mean, but those are things that at the beginning of the season, we wouldn't have accounted for. I mean, same thing for Baker Mayfield. They get Kevin Stefanski over. We think it's going to be a run first offense because he came over from Minnesota. And for the first few weeks, that was true. I mean, but I don't know if you want to say it was because they lost Nick Chubb and they didn't have really the engine for that offense. Okay, fine. I can lend some credence to that. But still, from, I think it was after that really bad windy game that they had, I want to say around like week 10, but from week 11 on, I mean, they were, I think, plus 60% in neutral passing rate. Baker Mayfield was throwing down the field at like above or close to like a 20% rate. I mean, they were aggressive. I mean, this was a team that, I mean, this was, again, a team that we didn't really think it was going to be maybe featuring Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry, maybe some Austin Hooper sprinkled in, but now we're relying on Rashard Higgins. People are throwing a dart at Donovan Peoples-Jones on a weekly basis. So, I mean, these are offenses now that have completely changed or flipped the script from what we thought they were going to be earlier on in the season. So that's the one thing that I tried to disconnect myself from what I thought the teams were going to be earlier in the season, especially after having, I mean, weeks of data kind of suggesting that they weren't the same offenses and these weren't the same teams that we thought earlier in the season. So I think that's one thing I'm going to try and definitely adhere to more, like once we get into the 2021 season. It's fine to have those off-season takes based off of the information we have, but once we have new information, shifting to that and trying to apply that moving forward.
Let me give you two. All right, first of all, I'm going to say that one of mine is to have less takes in the offseason.
Mm.
And I say that because Vegas has proven that we are all idiots and the crowd is wrong. The crowd is always wrong. And let me give you one to back that up. One of the strongest narratives last offseason was wide receivers changing teams always fail. And I'm saying Diggs and Hopkins are like saying, "Can I have a moment? Can I get you for a moment?
Hold my beer."
Yes. And I'm just saying that too many narratives, and you're right. We need to, instead of doubling down, we need to say, hey, maybe I was wrong, and be open for this iterative thought process preseason that we will get this year, week 1 and week 2, and be so willing to pivot instead of doubling down. Because our nature, especially as guys, is to double down and say, if Derrick Henry's not it, then I don't know what I'm going to do, or CEH or whatever. And we just have to be able to say, let's pivot. Let's do something. Your thought?
Right. Oh, absolutely. And the other one that I was thinking about, what about all those off-season narratives that we had about the rookies?
Yes.
I mean, it was no off-season. I mean, no training camp, no preseason. So maybe the running backs. Maybe the running backs might be able to make it because, I mean, the adjustment from the college scene to the professionals, I mean, not as much of an adjustment. Maybe you have to learn some new blocking, that sort of thing. But for running backs, they should generally be okay. But for wide receivers, you need that rapport with your quarterback. You need to understand what the different routes you're going to have to be able to run, being able to beat man or press coverage on a more consistent basis. I mean, those are things that, I mean, and to me, and I would say that I definitely fell for this, or not necessarily fell for this, but I understood the logic. But I mean, for wide receivers, I can understand. But I mean, look at the talent that we had at the rookie for wide receivers, like in this class. I mean, we saw what 3 or 4 go in the first round, a couple more going in the second round. And I mean, and now these are guys that we were plugging in week in, week out, like into our like redraft dynasty or even DFS lineup. So people were making a lot of money off of these guys. I mean, and it just, to me, it goes back to, I mean, show me how these guys win. I mean, are these guys actually talented? And for the majority of them, I mean, we still need to see a little bit more out of guys like, let's say, like Brandon Ayuk, like who was like injured throughout most of the season, or even like guys like Denzel Mims, who didn't really get too much of a shot because he's attached to Adam Gase. But Justin Jefferson, I mean, CeeDee Lamb, I mean, Jerry Jeudy, I think the jury's still out on him as well. But I mean, for a lot of these guys, I mean, they were guys that, I mean, we knew going through the entire draft process that they were good players. They were productive players, and they were going to be a part of, at least for most of them, productive offenses as well, and attached to good quarterbacks. So if most of that is already in place for those wide receivers like coming into the league, then we should at least be able to, I mean, it might be, I guess, a weak trope to kind of toss out there, but you can bet on talent for a lot of them.
Yeah.
And I think that wound up being the case. I mean, look at Justin Jefferson, my gosh. I mean, being able to, I mean, not instantly, it took a few weeks, but to connect with a guy like Kirk Cousins, who we see as more of a back end of the league in terms of like quarterback quality, but to connect with Kirk Cousins and now basically pull Kirk Cousins into the QB1 mix on multiple weeks. I mean, I think he's pushing, to me, it looks like he was pushing at least for offensive rookie of the year, to me personally. I mean, but again, you saw the talent like when he was still in college. You see now that instantly developing in year one when he's in the pros. So I think it's just something that we need to be able to adjust for moving forward. And we'll see what this next season's offseason is going to look like as well. I mean, and it could wind up being something that we're going to have to adjust for in the 2021 season.
Oh, yeah.
So how are you actively using this to improve for next season?
For me, just going back to that particular point that we were just talking about, it's about understanding how those guys win. I mean, what is their production profile when they were in college? And one of the mistakes that I made, like coming into this, was that looking too much into not just like draft capital, but trying to put too much stock into landing spot. Again, take Justin Jefferson, for instance. Like while good player. Definitely liked him when he was at LSU. But I mean, for me, the thing that kept getting stuck in my mind was that, well, Justin Jefferson, LSU, okay. I mean, they had a prolific season, like his final year. So maybe there was something more, like maybe there was something there in terms of it being the creativity of that offense more so than him as a talent. I didn't put too much stock in that, but that still stuck in my mind. He was used a ton as a slot receiver, and they already had a slot receiver there in Adam Thielen. So could he win outside as a perimeter receiver? Okay, that was still a yellow flag for me, not necessarily a red flag, but it was just something that was stuck in the back of my mind. But then also, when we were talking earlier about offseason narratives, well, I mean, even though they lost Kevin Stefanski, the Vikings were still, in my mind, going to be a run-first offense. There was nothing to me that suggested that Kirk Cousins was now going to essentially, and I think for a number of weeks he did, lead the league in deep ball attempts. Right. And so who else was going to be on the end? I mean, it's not like Adam Thielen at 28, 29 years of age was going to be the one running down the field. It had to be Justin Jefferson in order to do that. So while there were some elements to Justin Jefferson's game that I didn't particularly see coming, but I think one of the things that I didn't take into account was and didn't look into enough was how he was able to play in college. I mean, while he was primarily a slot receiver, he did have a good release technique. He does understand and know the nuance of route running, even at the college level. So there should have been enough there for us to say that he could be a greater part of that offense within Minnesota. But I think, again, after seeing that, I guess that change or that development for him at the professional level, that's going to be something that I try and take into account more moving forward, especially for the 21 class, because we have another decent class of wide receivers coming up behind them.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And especially with this incoming class being just as deep. It's not just top heavy like it is with the running backs, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So shifting a little bit, what are your playoff predictions?
I'm hoping, and I don't think I would have said this had you asked me this question either before the season or even in the middle of the season, but I think I still want the Chiefs to take the AFC, but I'm hoping that the title game comes down to the Bills and the Chiefs. I want to see that matchup. I want to see, I mean, because so much has been made about the improvement of Josh Allen and just of the Bills in general. I mean, because I did not see this coming. Nobody saw this coming. I mean, if you could have told me back in like June, July, that Josh Allen, I mean, one of the most erratic passers in the league, would now be leading a team at not just with his legs, but also being one of the most accurate and efficient passers in the league. I mean, he's top 5, top 6 in EPA per play. I mean, the Bills are, I want to say like top 4 in neutral passing rate overall. I mean, he's doing this with his arm, which is not something that we would have guessed or thought of like when we were looking at him in the 2019 season. So I want to see how he would stack up against what we think and what I think most of us would agree is the best offense like in the league, in the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, so many of they've been trending downward, I think, over the last few weeks, especially against their last game against Atlanta. But I mean, when you look at Kansas City throughout the rest of the season, I mean, essentially leading the league in offensive yards per drive, points per game, so many of those offensive metrics that are good for fantasy. I would love to see those two teams go up against each other, and we'll see who comes out on top. I mean, for me, I would still like to see Patrick Mahomes go back to back. If it's not going to be Lamar, I would love to see it be Patrick Mahomes going back to back. But either way, I still want to see those two teams go at it and wind up going to the Super Bowl.
We're NFC, Lamar fans. We are Lamar fans over here. The other interesting thing about your prediction is the loser probably loses their offensive coordinator because they will have more time to interview. And I'm talking Daboll or Bieniemy. And so there's an interesting dynamic there. Sorry to cut you off.
Oh, I agree. And so much was made, especially in the game last night, about where Daboll is going to wind up at during the 2021 season. I'm interested to see that as well. I don't know if it's a foregone conclusion that he's going to wind up leaving, because we've seen in the past, I mean, guys like Sean McDermott, not Sean McDermott, Patriots, Josh McDaniels.
Josh McDaniels.
Yeah. Like guys like him, like wind up, I mean, Josh McDaniels, he tried his head coaching thing with the Broncos. I want to say, what was that, like maybe 10, 15 years ago? I mean, didn't work out, probably because he didn't like Jay Cutler. Nobody likes Jay Cutler anyway, so that's fine. But I mean, but they wind up, I mean, he winds up in New England and stays. I mean, and if they wind up, I mean, if the Bills wind up going to the Super Bowl and win, I mean, who's to say that Dable doesn't stay and they try and run it back in 2021? So it's possible. But either way, for the NFC, I don't know, to be quite honest. I mean, there's so many teams that you see like with these 10, 11 wins. But to me, I think it would be kind of funny if the Cowboys wound up making it, just to say, because I'm a Bengals fan. To see Andy Dalton in a playoff game and then lose in the first round, it would be poetic. In some way, shape, or form. But I'm kind of hoping that the Seahawks could get things together and we could actually see like what we saw, not necessarily what we saw in the earlier parts of the season when it was the let Russ cook movement was hot and heavy. But I'm hoping they kind of if they could work it back into at least something that's more functional. We're seeing more production from both DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett in the same game. I'm hoping that at least for me, it'd be the Seahawks that wind up making it.
I do not like Drew Brees going to Lambeau, if that's the title. I mean, because he's a dome guy. I love Brees, don't get me wrong. But I'm not so sure that, just getting Michael Thomas back, I'm just unsure. They are, I don't know. And also, it's kind of interesting to watch Aaron Rodgers and Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon tried to bludgeon people together. We're going to bludgeon you with a butter knife and just, blunt force trauma all around. Reese, who do you like?
In the AFC, I sadly think the Chiefs are going to make it. And in the NFC, lots of teams have shown hot flashes, but the teams that are showing hot flashes lately are the Saints and the Packers. And the way the Packers looked last night, and the fact that Saints still might get injured and they might not have the best chemistry with Michael Thomas getting back, I do think it will be the Packers. And it pains me to say it, but I think the Chiefs might repeat.
Because he's a Broncos fan. Flash that old school jersey. You're not going to like the Titans because he's got
I was wondering what jersey that was.
It's an old Love You Blues Earl Campbell jersey on.
Nice.
And so, yes, Titans, I don't know, man. I don't know. I like Tannehill. Tannehill's been playing well. And so that's one team. I know their defense is like Swiss cheese. That's one team that could surprise.
They did last year.
Ravens, too. Nobody wants to see Lamar in the playoffs. I don't care who you are. They have a chance to go into KC and win or go into Buffalo.
I think so. They're one of those teams that it's surprising to think now here in 2020 that they're the ones that are on the outside looking in, especially after, that run that they had in 2019. But who's to say? I think they're at least in a decent position, assuming they. I'm guessing they're going to wind up with at least a wild card spot. But I think they're as good a team as any. Their defense, I think, has still been playing decent, not as lights out as they were in 2019. They've lost a couple of guys either due to opt-outs or injury like throughout the year. But regardless, Lamar Jackson in the playoffs, that's a guy that you typically don't want to bet against.
Yeah, but even the Titans, they destroyed the Bills, even though they hadn't practiced in a couple weeks on Tuesday Night Football.
Right. Yeah.
So they have a chance. The AFC, what's funny is everybody puts the Chiefs up. The AFC may be more wide open than the NFC. Maybe.
I think that's fair. It's difficult to say, especially after what we saw last year. With what did Sig Bloom say? Like when the Titans wound up beating the Patriots, I think he said that they destroyed the Death Star last season. I remember the analogy he was making to Star Wars. And even with their defense playing well, how do you bet against Ryan Tannehill? When even the other night, like when they're playing and it was, snowy throughout parts of it, but regardless, he was still able to fit some of those passes within tight windows. You never know. Derrick Henry I don't want to say he looked feeble against the Green Bay defense or anything like that, but he wasn't popping off some of those long runs. He was still 6 or 7 yards from 100. I mean, on Sunday night. So I still think it's possible for that team to generate enough offense to at least cover up their poor defense. But in the playoffs, who knows?
Who knows? And that's why those of us in the quote unquote industry enjoy the playoffs, because we get to put our hat back on, not have deadlines, and just enjoy football.
Yeah.
This is off script question, but do you have any advice on I assume that the Football Guys playoff championship is going to come out, or any other contest that's going to come out for playoffs? Do you have any advice for that?
I would say that, and that would almost be my advice for like drafting or putting together rosters for that is fairly similar to how you would draft a team for like the Football Guys championship that's hosted over at FFPC. Taking stances on players and taking stances on teams and constructing rosters around those narratives, I think is probably your best bet in order to win a playoff championship like that. I mean, you would really need to think through all the scenarios for like specific teams in order to advance throughout the playoffs, and consequently your team to advance throughout the playoffs in order to put together a winning roster. So you need to think about, I mean, since we were just kind of talking back and forth about could the Titans make it, could the Ravens make it, on regardless of which conference, but which teams do you really think, and what likely scenario do you see happening? And whichever makes the most sense, you can do some research behind that in order to see like, okay, what would that optimal path be? Then start to, collect enough players and structure your roster around that likelihood. And then from there, you should be able to come up with at least a decent roster, a group of players that can kind of reflect that narrative. But I think that'd be the best way to start versus saying, I like Lamar Jackson, I like Derrick Henry, or so on and so forth. I mean, it's really trying to structure your team around how you think the playoffs are going to roll.
So just to use an example, let's say Tampa Bay gets the 5 seed and Dallas gets the 4 seed. Are you saying that you want to stack Buccaneers for at least for the first week against the Swiss cheese Cowboys defense and hope that they don't have to play the Saints?
Yeah, I think that would be probably the best way to look at that particular matchup, because you do know going into it, Dallas's secondary definitely beatable. We've seen Tom Brady being able to excel in some of those bad matchups. We just saw him completely rip up Detroit this past weekend. So that would be at least a decent way to start structuring your team, and then look at what are those matchups down the road going to look like, and then kind of build it from there.
Find the players that are going to play the most games and get as many of them as you can.
Yep.
Not to oversimplify, but get as many guys as you can that are going to play as many games.
Exactly.
Not to go, well, duh, but
So next year, 2021, what would you say are going to be the top 5 picks in redraft?
In redraft?
It's a tough question.
Top 5 picks. Well, it's not. I don't want to say it's too difficult, because in redraft traditionally, I would say at least over the last 3 seasons, I think it was like 2017 when we were talking about some wide receivers like towards the top of the draft. But I think running backs for certain are probably going to still lie within those first few picks. I mean, regardless of what like Devontae Adams has done throughout the season or what Tyreek Hill did in spurts throughout the year, I can't really envision them being, a top 5 pick in redrafts. So I could still see guys like Alvin Kamara, possibly Zeke. We'll see. But at the very least, Alvin Kamara, Saquon, I can still see Saquon being up there for me personally, like in redraft. But then after that, Christian McCaffrey was probably still going to be there for me in the top 5. There's a case to be. Yeah, Dalvin Cook for sure. And then probably Derrick Henry to round out that group would probably be my top 5. I mean, you could probably make the case for actually that's probably it, because I mean, even after what Aaron Jones has done, I mean, back-to-back seasons with double-digit touchdowns. I mean, but the narrative behind, or the fact that folks still they definitely want AJ Dillon to be a larger part of that offense. We don't know if he's going to wind up getting extended, and we've already and we've seen and had that discussion about running backs on their second contracts. So I think at least those 5 for sure. And then we can talk about the Travis Kelce's of the world, and like, coming in right after that.
I'm going to make a case for Nick Chubb, because if that dude stays, Reese, because all right, Reese gave me the look. Those of you that are listening, and it's because I made the case preseason that I'd rather have Hunt than Chubb. But Chubb looked awesome this year. And if he stayed healthy, he would be in the conversation for top running back this year.
I think he would have made the run for the rushing title had he been healthy. I mean, right after he came back from injury, what was it? 3 straight games with over 100 yards.
Yes.
So, I mean, and that was without, I think he maybe had like 6 targets across like all 3 of those games combined.
Oh, yes.
So, I mean, he's such a productive runner, and he was a productive runner to start off the season. Who knows what would have happened if he hadn't wound up missing, what was that, 6 games, 7 games, something like that?
And he went out in the first quarter against the Cowboys.
Yeah.
But they rushed for over 300 yards. So what could he have done in that game as well? So he effectively missed 7 games.
Yeah, that he would have had him and Derrick Henry. Well, it was him and Derrick Henry for the rushing title last season. I think we would have still had the same conversation in 2020 had he been healthy.
And so I will take Chubb over Zeke, and there's a case to be made for Jonathan Taylor over Zeke as well.
That's fair. I guess the hang up for me for guys like Jonathan Taylor, and then also for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, is like, what are the guys that opted out this season going to do? What are they going to do with those guys? I understand like Marlon Mack, he's a free agent, so he could come back and the team could just release him. They've seen enough, but who's to say they wind up keeping him? They let Jordan Wilkins walk because, I mean, he hasn't had a snap in 2 weeks now, 3 weeks.
Right.
And then the same thing for Damian Williams. I mean, could they just let him come back and be a part of the offense? Because, I mean, Darrell Williams, like, while it was great to have him and he effectively played like the mentor role, like fairly well. I mean, could they just as easily keep Damian Williams as the backup? I mean, keep Darwin Thompson there kicking around in the background as well. And then they just roll with at least that 2-man committee in 2021. I don't know. So that's where my hesitation comes in, is because without understanding what those contract situations are going to look like with those guys returning after they opted out, it's hard to say. But I definitely agree that there's a case to be made for, at least for JT, not so much for CEH.
Right.
Well, one thing, if we move the camera 90 degrees, there'd be an article that he posted about the risk of drafting second-year running backs. And it has been proved out the past couple of years with Josh Jacobs not doing as well this year. Even Saquon Barkley took a little bit of a step back his second season. Zeke had a struggle, not just because of his suspension, but for other reasons. And that narrative has played out quite a bit. And also, J.K. Dobbins, I could also see in that conversation. I know I just went off on that, but there's really going to be almost no competition in probably one of the most run-heavy offenses. And I get that the Gus Edwards argument, but if you're rushing 400 times, you can allow 130 to go to another player.
Yeah, and to be fair, that article was in a magazine. I won't say for who. It wasn't Football Guys, but it was 2007, and so there was a long history of us pushing rookie running backs up on small sample sizes and them disappointing. And so that's all the temperance there. But there are still some stars, and the guy's a stud. He's a stud.
Yeah, I think so. I definitely agree with that. And especially the case for J.K. Dobbins, especially within the Ravens organization, because we've seen them. I think there's who was it last season? So what they wound up drafting Hayden Hurst in the first round. He develops. He looks like he's going to be a decent tight end, and what they wound up trading him. So they harvest enough value from him. Now that we've seen, Gus Edwards, when he came over back in 2018, we didn't think he was going to be much, or actually 2019, or was it 2018? Regardless, he didn't amount to too much after the 2019 season. We've now seen him break out in 2020. Who's to say they don't try and get as much value out of him as well, because he's also a free agent, like after this season. And he also winds up going to another team. And then now we're just looking at J.K. Dobbins, Lamar Jackson, and then Justice Hill as the guy behind him. It's entirely possible that they wind up going into 2021 with J.K. Dobbins as their number one without really having a significant 1B or 2 behind him. I mean, it's possible. I mean, the way that the Ravens organization has been run, I mean, it's likely that they try and get as much as they can out of that roster because they know that they need help. I mean, not just through their running game, but effectively through the air. I mean, Lamar Jackson has now been throwing touchdowns to Des Bryant for the past couple of weeks. So, I mean, they know they need to wind up, augmenting that particular roster in order to fit, the league the way it is now. I mean, it's a passing league. So they can't have Lamar Jackson doing Lamar Jackson things as much in 2021 if they hope to be able to compete with the rest of the league.
And they have contract issues where Gus is more expensive than a 4th-round rookie.
Exactly.
And, that's why they got rid of Hurst, is because they still have Andrews on a rookie deal. Boyle is cheap. And because that defense is expensive. Calais Campbell isn't cheap. And
right.
So anyway, it's always good conversation. And I'm with you with the running backs at the top, because if you have the 5-hole in a redraft, coming back that 1-8 pick is going to be a really good receiver.
Yep.
Regardless of whatever. This year you might get Tyreek, or might get Mike Thomas, or whomever, DK or AJ Brown.
Yeah, I think that conversation of what ADP is going to look like in the second round is definitely going to be something I'm going to have my eye on, because if it's not going to be like, because you're not going to get Devontae, you're not going to get Tyreek. I mean, those are going to probably go at the 1-2, but could you just as easily get, let's say like a Mike Evans in the middle of the second round? I think somebody like that is going to be there. It's going to be interesting to see like where all of the Panthers wide receivers, like where they settle out. Because I could see them going in the 2nd and 3rd round. Heck, is Carter Samuel even going to be with the Panthers next year? And if he winds up in the right spot, what is his ADP going to wind up looking like? So there's just, either way, I wholeheartedly agree, Jeff, that, while at the 105 spot, you're probably going to wind up with at least a solid running back. And then at that second round, somewhere in there, you should be able to at least get a solid wide receiver, but it's just trying to figure out which one that's going to be.
And it could be Kittle, and you say, hey, I'll just go with Allen Robinson in the 3rd.
Bingo. Yeah. After
or
that.
Thielen, something like that. Hey, it's flexibility. And
absolutely.
That's why we love fancy, right? It's like my dad used to say about ice cream. That's why the ice cream stores have so many flavors.
Baskin Robbins.
We all like different flavors.
Mm-hmm.
But for A-Rob, you mentioned, where's he going to end up? Because I don't think he wants to sign with the Bears anymore.
I wouldn't.
I wouldn't. How about even A.J. Green? Not that I love him, but, he's going to end up somewhere decent as a number 2B like Emmanuel Sanders.
Right. If without any, financial like hangups or anything like that, I would love to see Allen Robinson in Texas, like with Houston. I think that would be great. If they could dump Brandon Cook's salary, which is already expensive, and just take that money and give it to Allen Robinson, I think that would be a whole heck of a lot better. Than currently paying Brandon Cooks. Not to say that Brandon Cooks is a bad receiver or anything like that. He's a great receiver. We just saw him actually just tear up the Bengals this past weekend. But in terms of having just a complete, like an alpha wide receiver that can run all of those types of routes that you need, that you won't have to worry about him running across the middle and like not suffering a 6th concussion like for his career. I think that Allen Robinson would be at least a better bet for that organization where they currently stand than having him waste away. In Chicago.
They might trade him though.
Hopefully, but I don't know. We'll see.
The one I would want to see him go to is the Dolphins. Could you imagine if they paired him with Tua and Jamar Chase with the 3 overall?
Yeah.
Tua would be having fun.
Chase may be there for later or whoever, but yeah, they will have to surround Tua with some weapons. So before we get into the next question, that brings up I had this thought, and I want your perspective from both of you guys. Dolphins right now are sitting at the 3rd overall pick, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you entertain the thought of taking a quarterback? Has Tua been that good that you're going to pass on Justin Fields?
Yes, they should at least entertain the idea of drafting another quarterback. There's nothing to say that even the short flashes of production that we've seen from Tua over these last, so he started, it was at week 7, I think, when he took over. Yeah. And then he got benched for like 8, 9 and came back in 10 or 11, something like that. Regardless, I mean, in his starts, like throughout the 2020 season, there's nothing to suggest that he is going to be Patrick Mahomes or I guess the next like franchise changing quarterback. So I think for them, yes, I mean, the Dolphins should like exercise all of their options and look at a different quarterback. I think, I mean, the Eagles, like, while it looked absolutely crazy for them to wind up taking Jalen Hurts, I mean, this past season, look at them now. I mean, they actually, I mean, while they have a conundrum on their hands as to how they're going to possibly offload Carson Wentz's contract, I mean, I think the pick is vindicated at this point. They would not be in this situation, or at least look the way that they do now, had they not considered, I mean, drafting another quarterback at the spot that they did. So I think for the Dolphins, I mean, regardless of how they feel about Tua, I think any franchise is wise to take a look at all of their options. I mean, literally, unless you literally have Patrick Mahomes on your roster, you should be considering all of your possible options when it comes to building that franchise and continue to make sure it's productive in the future.
But you look at what Tua had in Alabama. Henry Ruggs, Jerry Jeudy, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle. He has Devontae Parker and Mike Gesicki now. Let's put him with some weapons first. See what he can do. Maybe even draft Sewell to protect him. See what happens.
Penei Sewell or whatever that is now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Draft him and draft Jalen Waddle or Devontae Smith later in the draft if they fall.
That's a good thought.
And just see if we can develop Tua. Well, not develop. Just see what he can do with regular weapons. And there was nothing to suggest Patrick Mahomes would turn into what he is now in his first start either.
So here's my thought for you, and we got to get going. But here's a thought for you all. If Dallas or Philly ends up with the 4th spot or the 3rd spot, you have a chance for Zach Wilson or Justin Fields. Does Philly take that chance, or are they bought into Jalen Hurts? Dallas, if they're afraid to pay Dak, do you bite off that and trade Dak? I'm just saying these are great conversations for the offseason. You got strong feelings on any of that, Chris?
I think Jalen Hurts has shown enough that they don't need to consider looking at another quarterback. I mean, even with his 3 turnovers, one which was like completely questionable because I thought his knee was down. But either way, he still wound up at like 386 yards or something like that passing this past weekend, something along those lines, and 60 some odd yards rushing. I mean, and I think he still wound up like positive 1.5% CPOE for this weekend. So he was still a good quarterback. I mean, it's just that Dallas was able to adjust their defensive protection in order to isolate and like actually just spy him and make sure that he wasn't going to take off like he had in the previous game. So limit the rushing lanes the same way that Kyler Murray has been limited. This is what you get. I mean, but still Jalen Hurts was productive as a passer. So I think there's enough pieces there for the Eagles to be able to at least look elsewhere, maybe at wide receiver or offensive lineman or, literally anywhere else. But I don't think they need a quarterback at this point.
And 2nd round rookie quarterbacks are cheap compared to other players.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking for Eagles, I think you have more pressing issues than Jalen Hurts. I think you need to surround him with weapons and protection. Yeah. You cannot. I think it's unfair to judge a quarterback without that. That's why you give Sam Darnold another chance.
Somewhere. Greg Ward and you saying Greg Ward and Fulton aren't enough? All right. Let's start.
So we've mentioned this phenomenal rookie class. We were to wind the clocks back 6-7 months, if it's been that long, with the knowledge we have now, how would you redraft the 2020 rookie class in a rookie draft in Dynasty?
For me, it'd probably be Jonathan Taylor up front. Then probably shortly thereafter, let's see. So Jonathan Taylor, do I want to put any of the wide receivers like shortly after that? I don't think I can make the case for a wide receiver there. I'd probably go J.K. Dobbins right after that. At the 3 spot, I would probably take Justin Jefferson, I think. And then Clyde Edwards-Helaire shortly after that. I still believe in the talent. I still think that he can be at least a decent producer. I think there was enough there. We just didn't see the flashes. We didn't see those home run hits, those home run production that we had expected to. but I still think he's a part of the Chiefs offense. I think he can do better next year. So I'd probably take CEH there at 4, CD probably right after that at 5, Cam Akers at 6, just because I don't know what they're going to wind up doing, at least from a committee standpoint. I mean, they're probably still going to bring back Malcolm Brown again next year. Yes. Henderson is still part of that offense as well, even though he hasn't shown nearly the same level of burst as Akers. I'd probably take Akers there at 6. 7, probably a coin flip. I'm thinking I still would want to have Reagor somewhere in there, either at 7 or 8. But I'm thinking I'll probably take Reagor there. But now take that back. I want Ayuk over Reagor at this point, I think. But then probably Reagor shortly after him at 8. And that's probably like where I'd stop and have to think about it afterwards.
So no Gibson, no Robinson.
I guess like I thought about both of them, but at least my issue with Robinson, like if I wanted to go back, I mean, but you're trying to project, I guess for Robinson, I'll admit that I missed Robinson. For Gibson, it's more of like what's his projectable workload, regardless of how much better he looked than Barber or McKissick. I mean, McKissick was still being force-fed, like literally double-digit targets in most of the games, even with Gibson being active. And I mean, and now with this whole like Dwayne Haskins thing, and we don't know like who's supposed to like really take the leadership for this team. I mean, what type of situation are you investing in? And for me, it's like I would just rather bet on the talent that I know, and that would be Justin Terry McLaurin, and then just kind of let the chips fall where they may, like with the rest of it.
Yeah. The other receiver is Higgins, that I think deserves in that conversation with the other
Very
guys.
much so. Yeah.
You could say, I'm not saying which order or any of that stuff, or Claypool or one of those guys.
Yeah.
All right. Let's keep moving.
So at the 2020 rookies, how would you rank the top half of a rookie draft
for next year?
Oh, for next year?
21.
Probably Jamar Chase up at the top for me. More probably thereafter. And then after that, to be quite honest, I need to dig more into it. I mean, those are the guys that I've been following the most. The running backs, I'm still trying to understand like what their possible landing spots like could be. I mean, for like ETN, I mean, great production profile, like no issues with that as well. I mean, same thing for Najee Harris. But like, and then this is the thing I was talking about with a couple of my buddies earlier in the week. It's like, where do we see them possibly going that they could wind up having that sort of value that we would want out of a rookie running back? And I'm coming up short, to be quite honest. I mean, again, I'd already mentioned this team beforehand, but like the Texans seem fine. I mean, as a place for a rookie running back to land, I mean, I'm not certain that they're going to wind up keeping David Johnson, but for the rest of them, where can we like honestly see them falling in order for them to have value in 2021? And again, I'm coming up short.
How about Atlanta? ETN on the turf, on the dome. I would like to see that.
Yep. That's a great one right there. I think that would be great for him. I mean, because I mean, obviously I cannot imagine Todd Gurley being there in 2021. I mean, Brian Hill, Ito Smith, I mean, get those guys out of here. I think that'd be a perfect fit.
Or this might be for Najee Harris more, but the Dolphins, because I do not think Myles Gaskin is the answer.
Nice story, but I don't think that he's the answer either. More of I think he'd be more of like a 1B satellite. I mean, that sort of thing versus making him like your primary rusher.
I was just thinking of places that don't really have a running back.
Right.
Yeah.
But even like the Jets, I mean, you can't tell me that Lamichael Pirine. I always get the Pirine brothers mixed up. But, they really don't have anyone. And there's a lot of other teams that don't have even like San Fran. Is Jeffrey Wilson and Mostert going to be the guys? I mean, I don't know. Don't say McKinnon either.
I think so, because they've had opportunities to pay up for other running backs like over the past couple of years. And it seems like Shanahan is very much a part of the don't pay for running backs. And he wants to continue to invest in that offense that he has Like when they took Brandon Ayuk like this past season, it seems like that's the type of team that he wants to form. He wants to form like that fast paced like type of offense where you can get those receivers that can generate those yards after the catch. And I don't think there's been a running back that really fits that particular style so far, not from this class. Maybe like a guy like, I think like Najee Harris, like he might be able to fit that type of role, but otherwise I think he'd be just as fine and just kind of like kicking the can down the road and keeping the guys that he has because he knows he can get production out of them. I mean, he'd probably keep Kyle Juszczyk until he retires.
Yeah, that Juszczyk makes more than those other guys combined, other than McKinnon, because McKinnon signed that fat deal.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the Bengals, but then I remember Mixon had signed the extension this offseason.
Yeah, that's still upsetting.
I bet it would be too.
Yeah. I'm hoping that the Bengals can wind up. There's no way to get out from under Joe Mixon's contract, but I mean, if they they let AJ Green walk, they free up some money there. They bring in some more talent along the offensive line, maybe pick up a free agent or two that can help in the passing game. I really wish they'd still had Marvin Jones. That would have been great. Yeah. Versus like AJ Green and like in his deteriorating health. But regardless, I'm still hopeful for the Bengals. They're my team, but it's just, I don't know, the way that they deal out contracts, not the best.
If they'd kept Sanu, then they'd have a quarterback now.
Yeah. I mean, the quarterbacking hasn't, but to me, I guess the one thing that I would say to Zach Taylor's credit is that he has been at least been able to show he can coach. Yes. I think over the past like couple of games, I mean, because I threw this out, I was talking with Josh Norris on Sunday. Not to name drop, but I'm just telling you who I was talking to. But I don't think that the Bengals would have won against the Steelers had Joe Burrow been under center. I think with Joe Burrow being more of a pass happy quarterback and Zach Taylor wanting him to develop, I think they would just continue to throw into the strength of the Steelers defense, which has typically been, I mean, they blitz and they have good players in the secondary. And I don't think they would have been able to do what they did against the Steelers, like had Joe Burrow been under center. So I think it's a credit to Zach Taylor taking what he has and then really molding the offense to Brandon Allen, Ryan Finley, in order to generate these couple wins over the past couple of weeks. But either way, I'm still hopeful that Taylor can turn it around and at least not look as bad as they have over the past couple of years.
If I'm the Bengals, I sincerely hope that the Dolphins take Jamar Chase or someone like that. That way you can get sold from Oregon and you don't have to worry about Ryan Finley tearing 3 ligaments.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Oh, it's been a great talk with you, Chris. We thank you for your time. Where can everybody find your work come this off season?
Over the off season, I think most of it gets condensed down to just 4 for 4. I'll be writing over at rotoworld.com at least throughout most of the playoffs. I don't think like the off season for them really kicks in until after the Super Bowl is over. So I'll at least have my weekly column over at RotoWorld for the next month or so. And then all my off season stuff, I'll be looking at quarterback draft strategies since I've done the quarterback streaming column over at 4 for 4. I'm also the director of Best Ball. So I do like strategy, looking at win rates and like roster construction for Best Ball. So I'll be doing that over at 4 for 4. So as soon as the Best Ball lobbies open, you'll probably see me, massive degenerate, like probably hopping into those and doing Best Ball drafts as soon as they're open. But yeah, most of the stuff you'll find over there. And then of course, like for Dynasty content, I'll be over at DLF.
Well, we'd love to have you back in the near future.
Anytime, you guys. Like I said, I'm especially now with more time, I'd be happy to sit down and talk beforehand. But you guys are so easy to talk to. I mean, shoot me a DM anytime.
It's always Reese.
It's always me. What?
That's easy to talk to.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.